is the biggest story unfolding before their eyes.
Surrounded by friggin' UFOs.
Of a UFO battle in orbit around Earth.
I believe that's 0420.
Today I'm going to be talking about a man named Graham Hancock. Yes, he's behind the Netflix docuseries Ancient Apocalypse, and he's also a world-renowned journalist. But what's important is the work he's done. So I'm going to take you through a journey of some of Graham Hancock's work and his story. So it's up to you to sit back and realise that everything about history that you've been taught is completely wrong. It's time for you to open your mind and your consciousness up to the possibility and realisation that there's more to our history than what meets the eye. Since then, he's copped all sorts of criticism and stigmatisation about the subject that he's researching, because his hypotheses to evidence, factual evidence that he has found, so his findings have been against mainstream values and ways of thinking. So in response from the mainstream archaeological community and scientific community wasn't to research and try and prove him wrong. It was just to use propaganda against him to ridicule and shame his work. This is exactly like the UFO subject through its entire history. They just ridicule and disappropriate his work.
Your wife's Xanthi, she's a woman of colour. What about when they're saying you're racist? Didn't that make you think, why don't you f*** off?
Yeah, it did make me think, why don't you f*** off? You fucking deceitful liars. This is where I speak of a propaganda war, because it's as though they selected certain key words. If we can apply these key words, if enough people repeat these key words, then people won't read any of Hancock's work or look at his series. And those key words included saying that my work supports white supremacy, that it encourages racism, and that it's anti-Semitic. All of those phrases were applied to my series. I don't understand why.
No, why?
Except to say.
I'm against all those things.
If we stick these labels enough, and if enough people repeat these labels, then people say, we won't bother reading Hancock because he's a racist and a white supremacist. And that seemed to be the idea. That's propaganda. That's not real scientific debate.
Mr. Graham Hancock saying he was a racist, even though his wife was of African descent, showing how ridiculous and pathetic their attempts are at discrediting Graham Hancock's work. Absolutely disgusting. And this is what it looks like when an archaeologist knows he's wrong and sees the facts in front of his eyes, but is still in a delusion of power and authority and cannot accept reality when it's presented right in front of him. The global cataclysm theory, which Graham Hancock exposes to a great degree, which also connects up with ancient structures, with the wear from the Great Cataclysm and the change in weather conditions. The Younger Dryas was when the Earth's climate began to shift from a cold glacial world to a warmer intergalactic state, about 14,500 years ago, which many of these megalithic sites have been carbon dated back to, further supported by biblical documents and ancient texts.
12,500 years ago was a very dramatic time on our planet. This was the 12,800 years ago was the onset of the Younger Dryas, which is a catastrophic climate episode, which is where the Earth has been emerging quite slowly and almost pleasantly from the Ice Age, and then suddenly goes back into a dramatic deep freeze. And weirdly, at the same time, there's an almost instant sea level rise.
And I do believe through Graham Hancock's evidence that there was an ancient civilization or ancient civilizations or even different species inhabiting our Earth that was either wiped out by this cataclysm or they exited the Earth by other means. Were they our ancient ancestors? Well, we'll never know with our current archaeology that's going on, which is restricted and closed-minded.
Of a collapse in human populations at that time. It was a very bad time. And it may have been, I believe that's the time where we lost track of an episode in our story, where we lost track of an earlier civilization, that not our civilization, not like us, we should never look for ourselves in the past, but a civilization that was capable of exploring and navigating the Earth, that understood the dimensions of the Earth, and that understood how the Earth looked and was capable of creating accurate maps with accurate longitudes. Incorporated into the Great Pyramid are the dimensions of our planet. And again, yes, Egyptologists know that this is the case, but they regard it as a coincidence. It just happened by accident.
Yeah.
But it's a point that I like to bring home. And this is that if you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And if you take the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid, measure that, and multiply it by the same number, 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. So the key dimensions of our planet are encoded on a scale of 1 to 43,200 in the Great Pyramid. And to tell us that it's speaking to the Earth, it's also almost perfectly aligned to true north, within 3/60ths of a single degree. Yeah. I mean, that is a tiny, tiny error on a monument that weighs 6 million tons and has a footprint of 13 acres, you know.
Through the ancient knowledge of astronomy, through hieroglyphs that are imprinted on megalithic sites, on structures, all through these ancient cultures, the evidence is obvious that this ancient culture had some sort of astronomical knowledge. They knew about our solar system thousands, 10,000 to 20,000 to 30,000 years before our ancestors even discovered that we weren't living on a flat Earth. There is some sort of connection to our solar system, and I think that is the root of where we actually came from. I believe we were an extraterrestrial race, or we were originally placed on this planet and bred on this planet and left because of the cataclysm and came back, but there is a part of history that is missing. One thing's for certain, but our current archaeological timeline is complete garbage. The only people that would believe in that are people that still are brainwashed by religion, by politics, propaganda, through mainstream media, through mainstream archaeology. People that cannot open their mind to the mere fact that what you read in a newspaper isn't always true. What we've been taught through the last 200-300 years isn't true. There is so much that's been covered up, and it's only just starting to leak out now. And Graham Hancock is one of the keys to learning about our ancient
that
past.
Same shape appears at Göbekli Tepe. It appears on the belts of some of the figures. Now, I'm not saying that people from Göbekli Tepe brought that idea to the Americas. I suspect it more likely the other way around, actually. But what I'm saying is that there appears to be an iconographic connection between the two sites, which is not explained by current theories of archaeology.
How did we have knowledge of astronomy and knowledge to build megalithic structures that weigh up to 200 tons and make symbols and lettering if we were supposedly archaic Homo sapiens?
There's this pillar in the so-called semi-subterranean chamber, this curious creature, and what it looks like is an extinct example of South American megafauna. It looks a lot like Toxodon, which went extinct at the end of the Ice Age. What's it doing on this pillar if the site is only 2,000 years old?
Here's some megalithic structures in order that don't make any sense. Rome, there's no way they lifted these 200-ton megalithic perfectly cut blocks. Stonehenge, Irish grave sites, Easter Island statues, in the middle of nowhere, with no tools, no timber. How the hell did this ancient culture build these? How did they carve them to perfection? Impossible. What did the ancient civilizations know that we don't today? Was it extraterrestrial knowledge? How did they build that huge petroglyphic structure on the ground without having any vision from up top? They must have needed aircraft. Concreting, how the hell did they mould that perfectly? You can clearly see that the megalithic structure with the laser cuts is pre-existing, and then the next generation of ancient civilization has came along and built on top of that, trying to replicate it, but not being able to. Drill holes, impossible at that time. These Egyptian blocks laying at a perfect level, physically impossible without a laser level. How did the Egyptians do it?
An established model
in some discipline of science that has been in control of people's thinking for a very long time suddenly falls apart. And it doesn't fall apart suddenly. What happens is that there's an accumulation of evidence which that model cannot explain. That paradigm cannot explain it. It seemed like a great paradigm at one point, but then it doesn't explain this. And then it doesn't explain like the paradigm that says that megalithic architecture is only 6,000 years old and that the first megalithic architecture was in Malta. That can't explain the massive megalithic site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey 5,500 years before that. It's evidence like that, the slow accumulation of evidence that the existing system cannot explain, that at an eventual point, no matter how strongly the advocates of the existing system hold on to it, no matter how determined they are in their defense, no matter what dirty tricks they may choose to deploy to undermine their opponents, sooner or later the evidence overwhelms them and the paradigm goes down and you have a new way of thinking. And that is the story of science, and it is a story that I think we're at a tipping point